I've just finished working the Turkish cast on, so now I'm about to start knitting the toe of my sock. And to knit the toe we need to work increases every other round. I'm about to start the first round of increases. Before I start, I'm going to place a stitch marker or a thread marker to mark the beginning and end of my round, and I like to use a long piece of contrast colour thread which sits between the needles at the beginning and end of the round, rather than a stitch marker which would have to go one stitch in from the beginning. So I'm ready now to knit the stitches that are on the wooden needle. So I'm going to knit the first stitch. So in the pattern, my wood needle is needle 1. I knit 1 and then I'm going to make 1 between the next 2 stitches, the previous stitch and the next stitch, by lifting the strand between the needles onto the left needle and then knitting through the back of the loop, which creates a new stitch, and by knitting through the back you twist it shut so that you don't get a hole. I'm now going to knit across needle 1 to the last stitch on this needle. Just move the gold needle out of the way. I now need to pick up the strand between the stitches on the right and left needle, but this time I'm going to place it on my left needle in the opposite direction so that I get the stitch leaning the other way, and I need to knit through the front of the loop this time. And I'm just going to take that out again. Sometimes if you've got a very splitty yarn like this one, unfortunately, I sometimes don't get a clean stitch. So I just backed out of it so that I could get a nice clean stitch, and I've made my new stitch with the bottom being twisted so that it doesn't make a hole, and then I knit the last stitch on needle 1. So I've increased a stitch at each end of needle 1. I now pull those stitches onto the cord and rotate my knitting. Let's just get that needle out of the way, and I'm now going to knit across needle 2, which in my case is the gold coloured needles. When I start on this needle, my tail end is here, so I must make sure I don't pick up that tail end by mistake. I'm going to take the other end of my gold needle to knit across these stitches, and again I need to do the increases, so I knit 1, move my tail end out of the way, and I now do a make 1 left, which is lifting the strand between the 2 needles up onto the left needle, so the left needle goes from front to back, and knit through the back of that loop, knit to the last stitch on needle 2, and again I'm picking up the strand between the left and right needle, this strand, but this time the left needle, the strand goes over the left needle with the needle coming from the back to the front, and then I use my index finger on my left hand to just roll the stitch around so that I can get into the stitch from the front to knit a twisted stitch and then the last stitch. So I've now got to the end of my increase round. I'm now going to turn my needles again pull the gold needle forward, push the stitches to the point on the wood needle, and this round is a plain round. Now at the moment I've got this thread marker which is sitting here with one strand across the top of it. You can use your thread markers to count your rows as well, so at the moment I'm not going to move my marker yet. I'm going to work one more round before I move the thread marker, so I'm just going to work a knit round, so that's all the stitches on the wood needle, and at the moment it does look very odd because the knitting seems to be flat rather than in the round, but we are working in the round. Pull the stitches onto the wood cord, push the point of the gold needle up, pick up the other end of the gold needle and knit across this row. So you can see here as I pull the yarn across, it's joining the last stitch on the wood needle to the first stitch on the gold needle. So I'm knitting across, if I rotate my stitches now, when I'm going to start the next round I'm going to move my thread marker to the other side. So as I go on I'm going to only move this every other round. In other words, I move the thread marker, do my increase round, knit around, move my thread marker, do an increase round. So it helps me to keep track of where I am in the pattern. You can also now see, as I'm getting more knitting, you can now see how the knitting will actually come round into the round, with this being the sealed toe of your sock. So you'd continue to work an increase round as I've just demonstrated, followed by a plain round until you've got the required number of stitches on each needle, at which point you will then start to knit the foot. So that's the increases for the toe up sock.